when I saw that Luca Guadagnino was directing a film adaptation of Queer. I didn't even know what the book was, but I knew that if Luca Guadagnino was doing anything, it was probably amazing. Then I saw it was an A24 film, and I bought the book before I even really knew what it was about, other than it's a queer story. And I am now in the midst of a Burroughs rabbit hole. I'm Quinn Moon, I write queer fairy tales, I read almost anything that is even slightly queer, so it is only fitting that today I will be talking about the film adaptation of Queer. And I have a script, otherwise this would be all over the place. I actually don't usually use scripts, I'm pretty organized. But this book is so abstract, so much to unpack, and I don't want to ruin the movie. So I have a good script so we can be coherent and we make good use of our time. Let me preface this also with, I am not a film critic. I don't think I'm even a book critic or a book reviewer in that sense of the word. I just like talking about books. I like asking questions. I like exploring the questions about the books. So I'm commenting on what I thought of the film as a layperson, just trying to enjoy the adaptation of a book that I enjoyed by a director that I think is lovely and artistic. So if you want a true film critic review, this is not it. But with that, we can move on. The film, directed by Luca Guadagnino, starring Daniel Craig, follows the same story as the book of the same name. And I say that intentionally because I could almost flip through the book as the film went on and follow the stories. Even with creative liberties that were taken, even with some deviations here and there, the film was so wonderfully true to the book and it was so masterfully executed. I personally loved that I could follow the film as I was watching it. I could see some pretty iconic scenes. I'm like, oh, this is where Lee is doing the routine. I could see where Allerton was ignoring him. I could see Allerton playing chess. I could see the quest for Yage, and I really enjoyed that as a viewer. We follow William Lee as he is trying to find love in the heart of Mexico City. The Mexico City that Burroughs gives us is unique, and I would venture to say kind of a generic version of Mexico, since Burroughs focuses more on Lee, the withdrawal, and the desperate pursuit of love. Luca Guadagnino, on the other hand, had the challenge of not exactly needing to create a true Mexico, but needing to create a Mexico that William Lee lived in every day. This was something that the author called out in the introduction, how Lee's version of Mexico was not a true depiction of it, but a depiction of what Burroughs' world revolved around. So the choice of bright acidic colors to reflect the drugs, the hallucinations, the lack of sobriety of the time, the slightly distorted architecture, even when entering a hotel, the unsettling elongation of the hallways and the doors, the way that the light coming through the windows always looked a little too harsh to be natural, let the viewer know from the get-go that something was consistently not right. Because I knew going into the film that Lee was an alcoholic and a drug addict that was supposed to depict his withdrawal, I wondered at every turn if this was really happening, a hallucination, or just a dream. And I personally enjoyed that part of the experience because it was similar to my experience with the book. I would have been extremely disappointed if the film had been a straightforward story that told of this guy on his quest for some crazy plant. I would have just noped out of the film. I saw a lot of criticism also regarding the casting of hot man Daniel Craig as William Lee, and by extension William Burroughs. I guess people just didn't like that. But then again, the casting of Allerton was also probably more gracious for someone who was described consistently by William Burroughs' friends as a cadaverous walking scarecrow. So I am less concerned with the choice to cast favorable looking characters as leads than the story that took place around them. And I think making them faces that the audience could sympathize with fulfilled something that both Burroughs and William Lee sought throughout their life, which was an accepting audience. Burroughs and Lee finally got that audience for this grandiose version of their routine, and I really was here for the ride. This film also doesn't shy away from Lee's stalker tendencies and his very blatant toxic obsession with Allerton, his coercion, his harassment. The film does not hide or try to paint William Lee as a healthy individual. regarding relationships at all. My friend that was watching the film that didn't know anything about the book actually mentioned how aggressive and coercive Lee was, and I said, yes, he's trying to stake a claim on Allerton any way he can and by any means necessary. So after a lot of awkward stalking, awkward interactions, desperate interactions, we get to the journey for Yage. The film at this point really takes a stream of consciousness visualization, in my opinion, because of the series of events that almost flow together without anything really anchoring it to a place like a bar or any other location or event. There are some bedroom scenes and a visit to the doctor, but most of the search for Yage is Lee and Allerton wandering through South America, and I think what exacerbated this abstract passage of time was the fact that Lee was going through withdrawal the entire time. My friend and I also found it kind of funny that Lee pitched this as like a getaway trip to South America and have all the fun you want, but he ends up being sick with withdrawal the entire time. My friend was like, wow, that's sexy. He looks like he's taking care of his ailing elderly parent, not like he's on a romantic getaway with his sugar daddy. It was hilarious and on point, but it is also this depiction of Allerton with Lee that I was missing. Because yes, Allerton might not have been as eager as Lee with things in the bedroom. In fact, Lee straight up asks Allerton, does he even enjoy it? Which is not what you want to be asking, but it warrants the question, because throughout the book, especially in the book, less so in the film because we get to see his physical reactions, it seems like Allerton just wants no part of it. So Lee asks, do you even like it? And Allerton says, yes, I do. And I don't think he's lying, because just because Allerton can't return the love that Lee wants, the way that Lee wants, doesn't mean that Allerton doesn't care about William Lee the only way he can. And that's something that I was personally looking for in the film because of that gap in character in the book. I couldn't see Allerton's facial expressions, but I could see how he took care of Lee the entire time they were in South America. I needed that affirmation from Allerton, probably the way Lee did. I needed to know that he cared about Lee in some way, and in the film, I saw it. I didn't get it in words, but I saw it in the way that Allerton covered Lee when he was cold, helped him walk from shop to unfortunate shop that all these shop owners were trying to like get out of my doorway. And when they were on this maniacal search for Yage, I saw Allerton and Allerton's form of affection for Lee. I was also surprised at one point Lee goes off to Quito and Allerton goes off to, I think, Panama in the book anyways. I don't know where he went in the film. In the book, he goes off to Panama or something. And he waits for Lee to come back. He doesn't just nope out and go back to the States. I found that really surprising. And in the book was one of the few moments that I, as a reader, was kind of reaffirmed that yes, Allerton does like Lee in some shape or form. Otherwise, it was really difficult to tell. This trip to Quito in the film is pretty much, it sets the tone for the rest of the film. It is this encounter with this scientist, or if it was a botanist, I forget, that we finally understand the question that has haunted Lee and the question that he has never had the courage to ask, let alone answer. The botanist looks at Lee, who's clearly a junkie, who's clearly looking for this crazy thing, like, you're not gonna get high. And Lee says, I'm looking for the telepathy. And the scientist says, who are you trying so desperately to communicate with? And let me tell you, when the scientist looked him straight in the face and asked him that, challenged him that, after watching Lee on his crazy quest for Allerton, on his crazy quest for Yage, trying desperately to find anything, any semblance of connection with anybody, be confronted with this question, who are you trying so desperately to communicate with? My mouth just fell open. I gasped. I'm a very expressive person when I'm watching a movie I really like. Thankfully we were at home, but I had to pause and process that question. I'm like, that's it. That is the question of the film. This film is the answer to that question. Who are you trying so desperately to communicate with? And hearing that question, I understood the motivation for the drugs, the motivation for the stalking, the motivation for the obsession, the toxic need to feel something, the fear that he felt was all acknowledged in that one question that he could never be able to answer, because that was the motivation for everything. That moment was also true foreshadowing for what happens next, and I'm going to stop it there because the yage chapter is the last chapter of the film. And the yage chapter is where the director's creative vision really just flourishes. And the ending of the film, which differs from the book, which differs from Burroughs' real ending, gave me the bitter closure that I didn't feel like I got in the book. The book ended the way it did, but I didn't feel like I had anything tangible to say, this is the end, this is the conclusion. And that is probably what Burroughs intended. He didn't want it to be the end. He didn't want the way it did end with Marker. And Luca Guadagnino came in and said, this is the end and the way that it ends. It was wonderful. I was heartbroken at the end. I wish it could have been different. Even going into the film, knowing it could never have been any other ending. I loved the quest for Yage because of what I was able to see between Allerton and Lee. And that only made everything that happened later all the more devastating to me as a viewer. I ended the film just trying to come to terms with an ending that I already knew was coming. And I'm glad my friend was there to talk me through it, because honestly, I think talking the film out with her was the reason I was able to reach closure. Also, let's just pause here. I am a viewer. I am simply a viewer, almost 100-ish years later, or something like that, 75. And I'm struggling to process this. I cannot fathom the heartbreak, the loss that Burroughs had to process on his own when everything went down the way that it did, and how haunted he must have been for the rest of his life. Because I am not a drug addict. He is. He's addicted to love. He's addicted to drugs. He's addicted to the chase. He's addicted to being chased. He's addicted to trying to find that connection that is eluding him at every turn. I cannot imagine how haunting it must have been for Burroughs for the rest of his life. So if you watched the film and didn't like it, I'm curious why you didn't like it. If you watched the film and liked it, obviously I want to know that too. I want to know what everybody's relationship with Burroughs and his bibliography is, where you were on like your reading journey of his bibliography, if this is like the first time you've heard of William Burroughs, the first time you read Queer. I want to just know what everybody thought of the book and the film adaptation. It was great. I loved it. My friend loved it. She said that she enjoyed that this film made her think a lot more, and that we were able to have such great discussions throughout the film. Again, thankfully we were at home. Let me know your thoughts. I would obviously love to talk about it, but I am exhausted. This book just exhausts me in the best painful way ever. I don't know. But that's it. I will catch y'all next time. Bye!